Dr. Chris Ernst and Christopher Gergen, welcome to North Carolina Now.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great to be here.
Chris, I'll start off with you. Now, you have co-authored a book, Boundary Spanning Leadership, and you're also affiliated with the Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro. Let's do a little defining here. What is boundary spanning leadership?
Great question, Mitch. Well, let's take those two words. When you think of the word boundary, it often means borders or limits, and spanning means to bridge or connect. So if you put those two things together, you've got it right there. Boundary spanning leadership is the ability to bridge or connect various organizational or community or societal borders to be able to achieve some higher purpose or some higher goal.
Well, you've been talking about like building bridges. What about some of the roadblocks that perhaps some leaders have in trying to be creative, and how can they break through them?
Yeah. You know, our CCL research shows that 86% of the leaders that we surveyed said that it was extremely important for them to work across boundaries in their role, but just 7% said they were very effective at doing that. So that's a 79% gap, and that's the issue that we really addressed in our work.
And Chris, I'll get you in on this because you are affiliated with the Entrepreneurial Leadership Initiative at Duke University, and this focuses on creation of social entrepreneurship. What's the difference between social entrepreneurship and just say good old entrepreneurship?
Well, actually picking up on what some of the things that Chris talked about, the interesting thing about social entrepreneurship is looking at how do we create sustainable enterprises, so entrepreneurship, but that have a specific focus on environmental sustainability and social impact. So it's essentially how do you harness all of this great entrepreneurial energy around us, but turn it towards social good. So the same thing that Chris was talking about, using boundary spanning leadership to be able to create greater good in the world. Essentially, we're trying to create a pipeline of emerging change makers that are thinking in these kinds of ways of not only how do I do good in the world, but how do I also do well? How do I make the world a better place?
And of course, this is through Duke University. What are the students learning as far as becoming more creative and working on their entrepreneurship skills?
Well, the interesting thing about where we are right now is we're located within the Terry Sanford School of Public Policy, within the Heart Leadership Program. So we have a very strong emphasis on leadership. So we put a strong emphasis on the personal leadership, challenging students to rise to their full potential, as well as being change makers. So we have a very interdisciplinary approach. So right from the get-go, we're trying to pay attention to this idea of how are we spanning disciplines, how are we challenging students to be able to figure out ways to be able to create new and different ways of approaching some of the biggest challenges we have in the world, and pushing them in that direction through very experiential education opportunities.
And Chris, when it comes to boundary spanning leadership, it's taken you like overseas and recently to Iraq. What was the situation like when you got there, and especially since they have been going through what they've been going through for the past several years? Yeah. How do you go about perhaps getting them on track to becoming more creative?
Well, I'll tell you, it's very interesting to fly to work each morning in a Black Hawk helicopter over Baghdad, and along with several of my colleagues, we've been working with senior U.S. government leaders there. And to their great credit, they've recognized, to your point, that to be able to bring these vastly different stakeholder groups together, as well as to transition now the mission in Iraq from the Department of Defense to the Department of State, we're going to require some very different approaches to bring groups together. And so, you know, it's a daunting challenge, but it really speaks to the world that we live in today, in which Chris was talking about, in which leaders have to now figure out new ways of bringing groups together to create new space and for them to collaborate to be able to solve and tackle the big problems that we face today.
Besides Iraq, are there any other, for lack of a better term, perhaps hot spots where you're working?
Well, you know, all of us in our leadership roles. I mean, we could be a CEO, we could be a community organizer, we could be involved with local politics, we could be a teacher, and yet all of us in today's world, the solutions to the big problems we face, they span across boundaries. So whether it's climate change, whether it's creating innovative solutions, whether it's job creation, whether it's healthcare or poverty, these problems, you know, they're only going to be able to solve when leaders are able to work across boundaries, bring groups together, and help solve the big problems that we face.
Any other countries other than Iraq that you're working with?
Well, I'm back from Brazil yesterday, and there in Latin America, the big issue is We've done very well in Latin America and Central America, and now we're looking to go global. And so for them, the big issue is how do we bridge boundaries between South America, our part of the world, with the United States and more globally. So anywhere you go, you know, we've been working now across 6 world regions, and whether you go from South Africa to India or China to Brazil, leaders are having to make this happen at this intersection where groups collide and intersect in our workplace.
Now, Christopher, Chris has been talking about the global impact, but closer to home, you're working on an initiative in Durham. Talk about this initiative.
So the name of the organization is called Bull City Forward. And we set it up because specifically what Chris was talking about, recognizing the fact that there were some pretty significant challenges in the world that we wanted to try and address, and to try and create a community of these social entrepreneurs in which they could begin to collaborate across boundaries, connecting dots in ways that they haven't been before. So Bull City Forward is a community-led effort focused on increasing the number of social enterprises within our community and increasing their chances of success. And so a big thing that we do, and this is, by the way, happening across North Carolina. So Bull City Forward is now becoming a model that Charlotte's interested in replicating, and Wilmington's interested in working on, and Raleigh and Greensboro. So it's been exciting to see how this is beginning to proliferate across the state. Is it around this idea, how you create a space in which you're able to inspire entrepreneurs to take on bigger challenges, be able to give them the resources for them to succeed, and importantly, allowing them to connect the dots that they haven't connected before, to increase their impact, but also be able to increase the impact of others. It's been really exciting to see some of the work that these entrepreneurs are working on.
And of course, you're busy on many levels. You've co-authored a book called Life Entrepreneurs. What does it mean to be a life entrepreneur, and how do you get a mindset to be one?
Well, Mitchell, it's interesting because we wrote this book after I've been an entrepreneur most of my career. I'm now on my 7th startup, just by way of comparison. And what I began to appreciate the fact that this isn't the mechanics of creating a new nonprofit organization or a new for-profit company. The people who are really creating extraordinary change in the world and living extraordinary lives had actually embraced the entrepreneurial mindset. And the entrepreneurial mindset we see as being understanding exactly who you are, what makes you tick, what are you passionate about, being awake to the opportunities around you that are aligned with that, having a vision for where you want to go, and then ultimately making the leap and making it happen. So we interviewed 55 people for the book. It's full of stories. It's been a lot of fun to write. And it's a lot about the kind of things that Chris is talking about, which is connecting dots that weren't connected before and really living life very intentionally and purposefully towards something bigger than yourself.
If I could, just on that point, you know, when we think of these boundaries, we often think about borders or limits or constraints or obstacles. But if you look closely enough in the dictionary, you know, there's an alternative definition, and it's the word frontier. And a frontier represents the location of the newest, most advanced activity in a given area. And so through these approaches to leading entrepreneurially, through spanning boundaries, through collaborating, then leaders are able to solve pressing problems, create innovative solutions, and help change and transform our communities to be able to thrive in this interconnected world that we all live in today.
And one thing I'll add to that, which is what I'm finding to be most exciting working within North Carolina and having the global perspective as well, working with Chris over at CCL, is that North Carolina is on the leading front of a lot of this. Center for Creative Leadership here in Greensboro, Duke's working a lot of these things, UNC's working a lot of these things, Bull City Forward. And so there's a recognition in the fact that this is a new frontier and that we need to take a leadership role at this state to be able to seize upon this opportunity and address this sense of urgency, which is really exciting to see how the state's responding to this.
Yeah.
And Chris, I'll just add on to what Christopher was talking about. What type of advice would you give someone? Now, there are people who have that mindset already of being an entrepreneur, but for those who may not have it, what type of advice would you give folks?
You know, I would just remember that wherever you feel these frustrations of dealing with these borders and limits and constraints, that there's a hidden opportunity there. That if you're able to use new ways to bring groups together, listen to their needs, try to find common ground, try to open up new opportunities, that's the opportunity space right there. So, you know, be in that moment, deal with those challenges, and try to see what new possibilities can be created.
Dr. Chris Ernst with the Center for Creative Leadership and Christopher Gergen with the Entrepreneurial Leadership Initiative. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for stopping by and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks for having us.